when it comes to sort of the UK side of how to view the Trump tariffs, there has been, I would say, a lot of pain and confusion, especially on the Brexiteer side, because you get a lot of the Brexiteers celebrating this as somehow some sort of Brexit win, that we only got hit with a 10% tariff, not a 20% tariff, and obviously forget about the fact that we've got, the steel tariff, the aluminium tariff, the tungsten tariff, the car tariff as well, which threatens about 25,000 jobs here in the UK, in the UK car industry. Uh, you know, the list goes on when it's sort of related to these new tariffs. However, however, there has been this very interesting split. Of course, we mentioned, and very interestingly, you've got this old school conservative, basically the Thatcherites, the last sort of Thatcherites, that have all been suddenly coming out of the woodwork, out of nowhere, trying to say these tariffs are bad, but we should also be firing back with our own. That is something you tend not to hear too many of our conservatives really go hard into. Sure, you may hear them say, well, we should put something on, retaliate some way, but they never say like how hard they should go. Meanwhile, these old school, last of the Thatcherites are going really hardcore into this. But it again goes to show you the change and the difference that has happened from like the 80s to Kimmy Badnoch's version of like conservatives. The change between them in those 2-3 decades has been huge. And most of it has happened since 2016, since that that hard right-wing Eurosceptic push and right-wing takeover of the party. And it is always something I think that when you look back in political history, a lot of people are going to write about that time. A lot of people are going to write about that time because it is hugely important to what is being sort of talked about in a lot. And we're also going to go over another very interesting piece tomorrow by another conservative who has basically come out and admitted his party's dead. So, but more on that tomorrow. Anyway, before we do get into this, please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to the Patreon page, Pony Club, one of Nation link called Buy Me Coffee, all that good stuff down below. Like I say, if you want to help the channel, click those down below. And of course, thank you very much to everyone who does help support the channel. So let's crack on then into this, because it's always fascinating seeing this view from, when people talk about being Thatcherite. This guy who wrote this, Harvey Procter, he is a Thatcherite. He was a Tory MP from 1979 to 1987. And you are talking height of like Thatcher in her prime in many of those respects. So let's get into this, because I think this is insane to hear, but also something of a view you do not see a lot of in the modern Conservative Party, because people like this have been pushed out, pushed to the side, and it's very interesting that slowly but surely they're trying to make their voices heard. So just because it looks like the Conservative Party is down and out, and I will say I think they're more down but not yet out, who knows what can happen. So as always, let's get back into this. So there was, of course, a time when the term special relationship was more than a dusty diplomatic cliche. It actually meant something. It was the warm rapport between Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. formed in common values, military loyalty, mutual respect. It was the alignment of two great democracies standing shoulder to shoulder against the two twin evils of Soviet aggression and economic stagnation. It was not merely symbolic, it was strategic. It brought down Berlin and ended the Cold War. Sorry, the Berlin Wall and the Cold War, not the Cold War. Uh, anyway, I don't know if I'm getting a cold now. Anyway, of course, in the early 2000s, this bond was, of course, found a new expression in, of course, the controversial but often tightly woven partnership between Bush and Blair. Though coming, of course, from different ideological traditions, both leaders fused the American exceptionalism with a liberal interventionist mission. Together, they responded to 9/11 with a very unified front, launching both the war in Afghanistan and, more divisively, the invasion of Iraq. Blair, of course, paid a very high political price for that loyalty, and of course, history verdicts remains very mixed. Yet, one cannot deny the extent of the British influence in Washington during that period. Blair was not a bystander, he was at the table shaping decisions, echoing concerns, and sometimes restraining impulses. Very true. Like I say, in 30, 50 years' time, Blair is going to be a very, very interesting, shall we say, individual when it comes to having a look at that history of that. That's definitely for sure. The relationship, however, however contested, was not one of civility. It was one of realpolitik and, of course, relevance. Contrast this with today's farce. Donald Trump's now newly announced tariffs and imports on Britain is not just very short-sighted economics, it is a direct insult to the United Kingdom. And I think that is an insanely strong condemnation of these tariffs. And I want to point this out that you are not seeing this from a lot of conservative quarters. A lot of conservative quarters are very wishy-washy, shall we say. But traditionally, just a couple of years ago, about 10 years ago, if the US had done these tariffs, this would have been the response from the Conservative Party. And it's strange to think now that is not what you would see. Like, that is not what you would see. So, to choose, of course, one example, he continues, our car manufacturing sector, already now navigating the choppy waters of the post-Brexit trade and the global transition to electric vehicles, it now finds itself economically ambushed by a supposed ally. Cars are, of course, Britain's largest export to the United States, with 18% of our exported vehicles heading across the Atlantic. This is why that tariff in itself is such a problem for our economy. And as I said, represents and puts at risk over 25,000 jobs. You know, Brexiteers want to talk about, oh, gee, we really got off light with that 10% tariff, right? And then they ignore the car one. So these tariffs, he continues, of course, aren't about fairness. It's about America first, Britain last. And this is what, and of course, what is our response? Silence, politeness, and worse, accommodation. It is, of course, reported that the president may even receive a full state visit. Red carpets, pageantry, gun salute. Such honours are, of course, typically reserved for heads of state who embody very shared values and, of course, priorities such as democracy and stability. I agree, but here's the thing: deploying the royal family as like our ultimate soft power play card for like these types of state visits was good. From what we've heard, Starmer giving that letter might have been one of the things that saved us as well. Like I say, we are lucky, and we'll maybe find out next week as well, because apparently more sectoral tariffs are coming. But if Trump decides to target services or the service industry, we are screwed. Remember, 80% of our economy based around services. Most of our big trade deficit with America is in services, not goods. But that's what Trump targeted, the goods. And like I say, we got lucky. We got very lucky indeed. So Trump, will, of course, threatens each of these with absolute abandon. He praises the autocrats, he undermines NATO, and emboldens those who would see Europe divided and Britain diminished. And again, you would not see this type of very strict pushback from anyone in the current Conservative Party. And it just goes to show you how much they have changed. So Keir Starmer, of course, as Prime Ministers, must do more than furrow his brow. He must, of course, act. A reciprocal tariff on all American car imports, including Teslas, is not retaliation, but it is principle. Britain cannot afford to look weak, nor should it be servile. And, of course, what of the king? Constitutionally, let me say it right, constitutionally, above the political fray, yes, but the very symbolic weight of a state visit is profound. It is not a neutral gesture, it is an endorsement. To honour a man who, of course, inflicted economic harm on Britain while celebrating despots abroad would degrade the dignity of the crown itself. Not to say the fact that we haven't had such state visits or questionable individuals in the past, but I do agree with him at least on on that point that its state visit does some sort of justify some sort of endorsement. So I do think that should be on the table as something we should pull. The special relationship, of course, was always more than, of course, a sentiment. It was about aligned interests with mutual regard. When Thatcher stared down Reagan over Grenada, when Blair engaged with Bush, not as a puppet, but as a partner, Britain had clout. It had a voice. I think that's what a lot of people are talking about. And I've said before, under this current Trump, under this current administration, the special relationship is very much dead. there is no such thing. Supposedly, our diplomats in Washington, they've basically said just don't even bother using that term. We just don't want to even hear it. Which again, I think, speaking to a diplomat, I'd love to get a conversation with like a UK diplomat. Be very hard to get, honestly. But oh boy, it would be insane I think conversation to have with someone at this time with what's going on that front. Anyway, under Trump, this relationship has become very transactional and hollow. We are no longer an equal, merely a convenience or worse, punchback. It's time to remember who we are. A proud sovereign nation with, of course, deep democratic tradition. We must respond with resolve, not reverence. No more one-way traffic. No more unearned honours. The special relationship must be a two-way street. Otherwise, it is delusion. Which, hey, I agree with. I agree with him on that as well. This guy gets it. Just how badly these tariffs have done, the damage this is going to do to the UK economy, like the strength and rebuke of what he has given was, as I said, what you traditionally see from a traditional conservative, not anymore. And of course, everyone in these comments pretty much attacking him. And then you get this comment, and I think these two comments here, this series of comments really is quite interesting because you can see there's a lot of people. This is why a lot of people have left the party, because as the party has moved more right, you've had a lot of people going, well, this isn't the party, they were once a part of anymore. As a result, they've either left the party completely or joined the Lib Dems. This is why I think in the upcoming May elections, you're going to see a lot of Lib Dem victories. A lot of Lib Dem victories, I think. I think they're the ones to watch in this upcoming election. So this comment starts. Since 2016, there has been, of course, a fringe of the party who have become completely seduced by nationalism. It is the idea that independence, which they mean by being able to do what you like, solves every problem, real or even perceived. Absolutely. Absolutely right. And it is great to see there are people in the Conservative Party who do see that. It is a real political equivalent of a teenager slamming the door saying, I can't do what I like. Well, yes, but having to fit into what others want, whether it is a teenager willing to, of course, lift a friend or even a sovereign state interacting with each other, you're required to pay attention of what each other's parties are seeking and, of course, the big picture of what you want. Trump was going to do the tariffs. He believes in them, and therefore, despite us being really good, he has imposed 10% on us. He liked us as he liked everyone. It appears that until he has had at least a good trade surplus with every country, he's not going to be happy with them. They are ripping us off. The idea will, of course, fail reasonably quickly, because at the end of the day, increasing the price of jeans from $60 to $100 makes people feel poorer. The big picture, of course, for us and Europe is to keep Trump in the game and, of course, in Ukraine for as long as possible. I agree with them on that as well. That is why the bigger the reaction from us, it is going to be pretty benign. And what's more is we are really not that important, of course, in a trade war. The EU, on the other hand, is, as for much of its regulatory power as a trade power. So it makes sense for them to let them get on with this. Therefore, doing very little now makes sense. I would not be rushing to do a trade deal, but certainly, quote, go through the motions is what I've been also saying we can see as well. This is why we are seeing a, or what's it called now? The value added pact that's supposedly being discussed. It's not a trade deal, it's just a value added pact. What a way to, uh, you know, you know, bamboozle Trump. And of course, wait until you make, of course, wait until you have to, of course, make a decision about Ukraine. At that point, heaven forbid that Trump actually really bats for Putin, then of course you react. In concert with the EU, you go after US tech. And I think that is what you go after, US tech companies. I think you should absolutely go after that. 100% on that. It is absolutely obvious you would go after the US tech companies on that front. But yeah, I'd be interested to see what other people think about this, because that is a very strong conservative condemnation. When especially you've seen a lot of UK conservatives not have very strong reactions. They've either been, well, yes, these are bad, but could have been worse. But other than that, they haven't issued such like a really strong condemnation. But I think it just goes to show you just how much the Conservative Party has really changed in relatively a short amount of time. Relatively short amount of time. Um, but as always, let me know what you think down below in the comments. Click the like button, click the share button as well on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.